Right, I'm just going to give a few seconds before we actually formally start. Please use the chat room if you want to introduce yourself. That would be nice to know where everyone is coming from today. Yeah. Right. Okay. I think I'm going to hit the start us off actually, and really by welcoming you and to our second Zoom meeting, which is part of the Banter at the Boathouse. And today we are going to explore the links between archival material and its places of origin and how it can help to reconnect communities with their past. For those that don't know me, my name is Audrey Wilson and I'm the Partnership and Engagement Manager at Scottish Council and Archives. And on behalf of everyone and all the speakers, I just want to say a huge welcome and thank you for spending your lunchtime with us today. So just a bit of background, today's interactive Zoom event is part of Banter at the Boathouse. I've already mentioned that. And it's an online case study by Scottish Council and Archives, where we follow the journey of Ingrid Shearer and her team at Glasgow Building Preservation Trust, caring for an archive collection dating from the 1850s. It should be noted that archive is a small part of a much bigger project, which Ingrid Shearer, Heritage Engagement Officer at Glasgow Building Preservation Trust, is carrying out. But before we hear from Ingrid, I just want to do a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. So I think we'll all be very familiar with the format of a Zoom meeting. And we really want you to fully participate in the chat and the discussion, which will happen after the talks. Please do keep your mics off unless you are speaking, and that means we will hopefully ensure there is a very smooth running order today. In the chat, please start your question with a Q, a capital Q, so that we can easily identify a question, but also feel free to comment and just use the chat room to talk to one another. At the end of the presentations, we will have time for a wider discussion, which again, you can take part by posing your questions in the chat room. If you'd like to speak in the discussion, to ask your question, please raise your digital hand, which you can find the button in the reaction section of the toolbar below the picture, or failing that, just start waving very enthusiastically at the camera and I'm sure I'll see you. So today is being recorded. Please note that if you contribute to the discussion either in the open session or via the chat bar, it will be shared and be publicly available in the future. So get in touch if you have any questions about this or you have contributed and have a change of heart after the event and we can do something about it. I don't need to say this to you all, but be kind and respectful when you ask your questions or take part in the discussion. We really want to make sure that it's a lovely, friendly and inclusive atmosphere at today's webinar. So we are tweeting and we encourage you all to tweet as well. Our Twitter handle is @CArchiveScot and @GBTrust. We will put that in the chat room so you can all see it. So enough from me and I'm going to hand over to Ingrid.
Hi everybody, welcome and thank you very much for coming along today. I'm just going to share our presentation here. Okay, and hopefully you can all see that. So as Audrey was saying, I work for Glasgow Building Preservation Trust. We're a charity that repairs and restores and repurposes historic buildings across the city. And our current big project is this building here, the West Boathouse down on Glasgow Green. This was before we started work on it. It was built in 1905 for the two rowing clubs that are still based in the building or will be due to return to it in the next month or so. It's capital B listed and we're almost done with the capital works now. So this is a before shot and this is a nice aerial shot that we had taken the other day. So you can see we're almost at the finish line. However, my remit is to engage with communities along this stretch of the river here. It's about 6 kilometres and it runs through the east end of the city from the Boathouse on Glasgow Green right up to Cunninger Loop. And for today's little talk, I'm going to be discussing the kind of far end of the route here around about Dalmarnock. This is a part of the city that's traditionally been under-researched and kind of neglected in terms of its kind of cultural and natural heritage, actually. And part of the project is to kind of tease out some of those stories from that area. Within the building, both clubs had accrued a fairly substantial heritage collection, mix of photographs and documents and oars and antler trophies and all kinds of stuff. And we've been working through that as part of the collections recording. So you'll be hearing a little bit more about that down the line in other sessions. This is one of our oldest pictures here from 1862, minute books, all kinds of stuff. And here's some of our lovely collections volunteers. I think there's a few of them here today. So, but we're going to talk about film today, and particularly film that our volunteer Tam McCann, who's a local historian in the east end of the city, brought in to show me in about 2018, I think, and it was footage that he'd got from a friend of the kind of area around about Dalmarnock, and we didn't really know too much about it at the time, but after a little bit of detective work, some of it based around these stick figures that appear at the opening credits. And you can see there's a strange thing around this person's neck here. It took us a little while to work it out, and then realised it was a dog collar. So that was a nice clue as to the origins of the film and who made it. Reverend Gordon Strachan, who was minister at Dalmarnock Parish Church in the mid-1960s, and was quite an interesting character, quite a maverick, who was an artist and, as it turned out, a filmmaker. And we managed to eventually track down he passed away in 2010, but we tracked down his wife and did some interviews with her, and we were able to kind of piece together a little bit more context to the original archive film. And that's Dalmarnock Parish Church before it was photographed taken in the 1960s. It was demolished, I think, around about 2010 maybe. The whole area around about Dalmarnock was substantially changed from the 1960s in advance of the 2014 Commonwealth Games. That we'll talk a little bit about that as we carry on. So filmed in the mid-1960s, and it kind of caught that area on the cusp really of some really major changes. So you can start to see some of the big high rises and maisonettes rising behind the tenements there. And at this time, there was probably a population of about 35,000 people working in the area in various industries. So originally grew up around about water-based industries. It's adjacent to the Clyde, so there's print works and dye works and waterworks and lots of water-based industries. And then you have Arles Steelworks come in. That was a big employer. By the start of the 70s, that heavy industry had gone into a terminal decline, and by around about the early 80s, the population had dropped down to about 2,000. It was quite a dramatic shift. So there's a nice aerial photo here of the area. You can see this is kind of the heart of Dalmarnock. And the school that we worked with on the project would be sitting in around about here-ish. But you can see there's tenements and industry and chimneys rising. And if you contrast that with this aerial shot from a couple of years ago, it's changed pretty dramatically. You can see some of that kind of regeneration starting to take place. So this area here was the athletes' village for the 2014 Commonwealth Games. We've got the new school in, but there's still large swathes of the area are derelict and vacant land. the thing that really struck us when we first saw the archive film was just kind of how busy and bustling that place was, full of people and also full of wains, hundreds of kids running about. They're everywhere, kind of through the film, and it really contrasted strongly with what you see on the ground today. So that was really what sparked conversation between myself and my colleague Stephen Sheriff, who runs Doors Open Days Festival. And we thought actually using that archive film could be a really powerful way to kind of explore particularly the kids' relationships with their own place, with their own community, and get them to think about what it takes to build a community, to make a new community. They've starting to kind of regenerate that area, and it's been really interesting to kind of watch that process of the new housing going in, new schools, new facilities, but there's no shops yet. There's no dentists, there's no doctors. If you want a pint of milk, you've got to walk to Rutherglen. And the kids they really feel that. They don't remember the Commonwealth Games necessarily, because that's now almost 10 years ago, but they understand what that lived experience in that community is like. So we got some funding from Glasgow City Council Education Department, and from Clyde Gateway. We had a filmmaker on board called Basharat Khan, and because the original film was silent, we got some students from Glasgow Kelvin College, some of the composition students, to score it for us. So it was Armin Radnia who did most of the scoring work, just talking a little bit about what a kind of interesting project it was to work on. And we began in 2020, February 2020, I think, on the project. And obviously then the pandemic hit. So we had a hiatus of about a year and a half, got back underway again in 2021, and started looking through that kind of archival source material, so historic maps and photographs, and getting the kids to think about kind of what was in their area before and how it's changed, and what they want to see in the future. We did a lot of kind of textile workshops. We did interviews with the kids and caught their responses to the film. And we made flags. We had a kind of dance and performance element to it, and all that's kind of included in the final film, that kind of response to the archive. And then we had a lovely premiere for them at French Street, which is an old weaving factory in the sort of Brigton, Kilmarnock end of the town, and they all came along and they got their popcorn and the red carpet treatment. And then we had a kind of adults premiere then, or a community premiere then in the evening. We had about 120 folk turn up for that. And the response has been really kind of amazing. I think the little film that we made has now had just under 1,000 views, and the original archive film, which we put out in 2020 on the GBPT video channel on YouTube, has had just under 10,000 views. I mean, that's just for, you know, a small archive film about Kilmarnock, of all places. It's, yeah, the response has been really amazing. So I guess this is probably one of my favourite photographs, actually. So that is Elspeth Strachan, who's holding her granddaughter there. It's taken at the premiere. So it was her husband who made the film initially, and it was really lovely to be able to bring her and her family, so that's his son there, and the generations kind of together. They were completely unaware this film existed, so it was a really nice kind of moment to be able to do that. So there's a wee link to the film here. I'll put it in the chat as well, but I think it's an interesting way of using archives, we know instinctively that they are rooted as much in place as they are in time, but our kind of natural instinct is to kind of centralize and corral archives and collections together into one place, and you kind of take them out of their natural habitat, their natural context, and sometimes that gathering process is very necessary for the safety of objects and items, or for just simply for access. But I think that playing with different ways to kind of restore and reimagine those links to place and landscape and community, it should be a kind of central part of any kind of community archives project. So I'll leave it at that for the minute, and I'm just going to check my time. I was going to show you a little bit of the film. I don't know if we've got, Audrey, do you think we've got time to do that?
Yeah, I think we do.
So
just show, yeah, you decide when you want to stop it. Oh, we're not going to have time.
Okay, I'll just show you. I'll just show you a wee bit. Then some of the interviews with the kids were, yeah, very interesting and funny. So I'll just see if I can do that for a second. Okay. February. Can you all see that?
Then the community was very connected compared to now. It's not a very crowded place anymore in popular places. In the movie, the roads and the street was more busier than now. Cars don't look as powerful and fast as our cars, and they don't look as like cool and all that. Like, we have Lamborghinis and all that now, they just have like Renaults.
Because like now, people don't go around like to the church, say hi to each other every morning and like go for a walk. Here's more, they're all like isolated and they stay home.
Yeah, the legacy hub is still there. I think, yeah, it's still there, and they're doing like loads. Like the last time they were doing like loads of clubs like in there, and I think they're still doing it. I don't know.
Where's that?
The legacy hub. Yeah, it's yeah.
So I'm just going to stop that. Sorry, I'll just turn that off. Right. Yeah, it was really interesting to hear the kids' responses to the film, and I think one thing that we were very aware of when we were working on this was thinking about that. Well, what happens next? What's that kind of impact for the future, and getting them to think about that, what they want for their own communities, and kind of giving them a voice as much as possible, because it's at the moment that that landscape is really quite stark and quite bleak. But if you're creating something like a film, you have to be very aware of that kind of impact, I think, and then have that kind of positive message embedded in there as well. Like, there is that possibility for change. So yeah, it was a really interesting process. So I'm gonna introduce Alan and Sally now, if you guys are ready. So Alan Dimmock's a photographer who's been running about the city with a camera for the last 45 years or so, and has built up a really substantial archive over that period of time. Sally Johnson is the Community Engagement and Production Manager for the Alan Dimmock Photo Archive, and they've taken an unusual approach, a slightly different approach to some of the archive material and how it can be exhibited a little bit differently, and really bringing that place and landscape element back in. So I will hand over to them just now.
Hello.
Hello there.
Hi there. I think this is on now.
Great. Dan, thanks so much for inviting us along today. And yeah, we're going to talk about the archive, which is pretty new from a digitization point of view, and talk about what we've been up to, kind of getting the archive off the digital and out onto the streets of Glasgow, and a little bit about our future. So yes. I'm going to hand over to Alan. I'm going to bring up hopefully a very short PowerPoint presentation, and you can see on my working screen.
Well, Ingrid, you certainly got the 45 years spot on, because I'm 61 now, and I think it was 17 when I seriously started to take photographs in black and white. And it's amazing how over all these years that I've accumulated, almost without knowing in some ways, over 90,000 images anyway. But it's really only, a lot of folk have spoken to me over the last decade saying, what are you doing with the archive? You've got an archive now, and it never really occurred to me, maybe until 2019, when I was kind of suggested to apply to Art 360 Foundation down in London, because they were doing a project in Scotland. So that I got £5,000 for that, and I realised very early on that it was going to take quite a lot of work to digitise the archive, because even though they were always in folders in my studio, they weren't in the best of order, and they weren't really in any kind of way that you could straight away go to a particular negative. So we knew straight away it was going to work. So I've been really lucky actually over lockdown. It was really difficult for quite a few months working remotely, but we applied to Creative Scotland later on that year, and were lucky enough to get a substantial amount of money to sort of launch into trying to digitise it all. And we've managed to get up to the millennium, and we've managed to do a lot of the art stuff that I've worked in over the years, but there's still, so we've got the first 22 years all done on the website, and a lot of the artwork that I've done with art openings and lots of other different events, that's all up at the Glasgow School of Art Archives now as well. So we're looking forward to trying to get the next 22 years done. But let's talk about more the outside the archive project, because that was really exciting. That was a really lovely part of the project that I think was really successful.
So Alan and I spent quite a bit of time talking about how we would really want to open up the archive beyond the obvious communities that would be interested in the archive, from photographers and academics, and knowing the Glasgow art scene, very keen on Alan's work, and Alan maybe being known more for that work, when actually his main body of work was the documentation of his stomping grounds and places that he'd spent as a young man, and on holiday, and in the locality of the sort of northwest of Glasgow. And initially we did feel that we had to do the kind of more traditional, get Alan, people want a bit of Alan in front of an audience and have him in conversation. So we did those traditional talks, and really things were just starting to open up from lockdowns, and also lots of venues already having programs sort of hung over from before the pandemic. So we kind of sat down and looked at what we already had and who we had in our networks, and really starting to think about what this archive could mean. And it was really interesting for me, as somebody that maybe doesn't use archives that much. I kept saying, so what are archives for, and who are they for? And why would anybody that isn't going to use it for a professional reason come into contact with it? And it was brilliant, because Alan basically just gave me free rein to delve into the archive, think about how that might be used. And the previous project I'd just been doing over lockdown was a audio walk project. And that had been really successful. It allowed people to go out and access stories by themselves at that point, when walking was such a new a new thing to people over lockdown, and exploring their areas. And through that, I started thinking, right, how do we make this, take these fantastic images of the northwest of Glasgow, focus on that area, and bring them out into the community. And we kept thinking about billboards and buildings and wrapping places, and all of these great Parisian drums that you see around Glasgow with advertising wrapped around them, called Maurice drums. We saw one, then we saw more, and we started thinking about how we could place those across the city. So fantastically, there's an organisation called Jack Arts, who are, they own those billboards and Maurice drums, and they're really keen to engage with artists and unusual, innovative projects. So after we'd done a series of these talks brilliantly with Stills Gallery, we had a party to launch the archive with over 100 of Alan's friends and associates, and that kind of started creating a bit of a buzz. We also approached the National Library of Scotland and worked with Emily Munro. They're looking at previous social documentary of Glasgow, but also getting films to talk to Alan's archive as well. And then started really mapping this area of the northwest of the city with these drums, thinking how else do we do it. And brilliantly, within the archive team, Alistair Dimmick, who's Alan's son, is a graphic designer and website designer. So we had him, and I think it was, and we had some funding from Creative Scotland, but we didn't have a whack to do community engagement. So we were just looking at what constraints, what have we got, how do we want this to work, and also knowing that Alan has this wealth of knowledge of the community and often eccentric tidbits of history and social history that really just create fantastic conversations with people. We decided that we'd create both an online resource and digital walk. And could just go to the next slide, and I'll try and bring up the actual web page. And also getting Alan out with his backpack on and leading walks over a couple of Sundays in the summer. So this is the web page. It's still up. There's still a few of the pictures actually up on the drums. You can see here.
I know that's since August actually. So some of them are weathering quite nicely. There's maybe 3 that are still extant, but it was such a lovely experience for me because a lot of the photographs that were shown on these drums were actually taken, well, we tried to place them as near as we could to where they're actually taken. So this image that's up is Mr. Wong, who lived just in the street to the right of that photo actually in 1982. I did a final year project at college, and I think I was the only person in my year to do sort of documentary photography as a final year project, and I chose woodlands because it was a really interesting area then, and I'd access through the Residents Association to take photographs inside some of people's houses. But it was a great combination for me because my love of social history, my love of Glasgow, the architecture. So we had 15 people in each walk, and I think everyone quite enjoyed themselves. I certainly did.
Certainly feedback, and we built these super large scale pictures, which I think Alan was a wee bit nervous about at first, seeing them in this format size and whether they would transfer.
Only because I always quite often print quite small for lots of reasons, but it was great to see them big actually, because I could see little details in them that you might not straight away see actually, so it was good.
And we linked that back. On every poster there was a QR code, and again with the impact of pandemic, so many people had just got used to using QR codes, and that linked back to the website and to a map. And actually we picked up quite a lot of people just walking past who clicked on a QR code, had no idea about Alan's work, who then signed up and came to the walk. And in fact, the first walk sold out in under a day, and we really didn't promote it at all. So we kind of stumbled up on that first last Sunday in July, and we're like, who's going to be on this walk? And it was just amazing. We decided we'd also end up in the pub at the end of it, so not a bad place to come together with people and have a chat. And it was really amazing what connections those people who weren't connected at all when they started the walk had when they started talking about the archive, the relationship to it, the relationship to place. There were people, there was one guy that had been living in Germany for 25 years. He'd just seen a picture of the university interior, of the university cafe, followed the QR code, came on the walk, and made immediate links with people from actually his childhood who happened to be on the walk and had no idea that they'd be there. So these conversations started to happen. And I think for our future work, we want to think of a way that we capture those conversations too. So we had brilliant feedback with global reach with this project. We had a guy called Chunny who's on one of the photographs. Actually, you can just link into the part if you want to scroll down to the images at the bottom of that page. There's a young chap in a shop looking over a counter.
Yeah, he was, I didn't really know him that well, but it turns out he was at my school, and chap with the turban on, and he was amazing. He had this little record shop called the Musical Box, and I hadn't spoken to him for many, many decades, and I emailed him the photo, and he said he was in tears looking at it, actually. He's a really interesting bloke, now lives in Australia, and has the gramophone museum.
His own archive of gramophone players, which is another brilliant link. So I suppose, you know, summarising this it was a bit of an experiment for us. We really wanted it on the streets.
We also did the thing Annie's Land, which is worth mentioning.
Yeah,
very, very
it's
briefly
still up,
too.
isn't it?
It is still up. I grew up at Annie's Land, and if you look through my Instagram, you'll notice, you know, family is quite important to me, and there's quite a lot of photographs when I would have been 18, 19. And there was the local co-op shop before the big Morrison's was there, and I used to go there as a very small child. Now my mum getting co-op stamps and this little album that I liked. But anyway, that closed down. Became a funeral directors, that closed down, and it's to let. And we managed to get access to put these posters inside the shop of images that were taken at Annie's Land. And the response from the public as soon as we put them up was incredible. I heard this voice going, "That's Mrs. Dimmick." And you've got to remember, my mum moved away 35 years ago, and yet people were still passing by the street.
We were doing an install and actually cleaning the grimy windows, and probably had 20 people stop and talk to us just in that time frame, and their stories.
The one at the top loader. That was it. Yeah.
Their stories were just incredible, remembering and reminiscing. So we realised that there's just a real opportunity to work with people and communities in the future, and having these large-scale pictures out there, kind of in the field, if you like, just created a dialogue that we weren't getting online. So our kind of future for this is, Alan's got a massive body of work. He's been going to Millport since he was a 6-month-old little baby without a beard, and has a massive body of work of Millport. So we're talking to North Ayrshire Council about doing a summer project there next year, having to return to Creative Scotland and any other funders out there to look at the next 22 years as well, and starting to have conversations with other archives too. So I think today, really for us, it's so nice to be invited along, but also please do get in touch with us. You can visit the archive itself by appointment. There's also an archive held within Glasgow School of Arts archive, and then the digital archive, and absolutely open to having conversation with everybody out there. So you can contact us directly at that email address, and please just swim around the website where there are just, I discover a new picture every day actually, and I've been inside it for about 10 months now. So there's many.
And it's ever growing, of course, that's the thing. I mean, I'm still shooting maybe 2 rolls a week. It's the same camera and lens that I've used since I was 18 actually, although I've gone through 8 or 9 of the cameras now, and yeah, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, which is really lovely, and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon, hopefully. I hope.
Great. I want to say, well, I hope you don't stop anytime soon. Please don't. But I just want to say very much thank you for giving us that talk, and I encourage people to use the chat room. I think it's very interesting that we can come and actually see the archives. So if it's the email, is that the best way to contact you? I'll definitely be paying you a visit, so I'll be contacting you. But if anyone else has comments for the discussion a little bit later on, please pop things in the chat room, but you also will have a chance to ask questions, which would be lovely actually to hear other people's voices. I do get a bit fed up hearing my own all the time. So I want just to say thank you very, very much, Sally and Alan, for that talk. But I want to transport people away from Glasgow. I'm going to take you up north because our next speakers are from Shetland and are based in Skye. So we have Mark Cheevers and Esther Renwick of Moderdye, Shetland Maritime Heritage, and Sally Evans, Research and Development Control Manager and Director of MSDS Marine, and they are based in Skye, and they are specialists in archaeological contractors. They have been working on a joint project funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and that's where I met them, because Scottish Council and Archives are also working on a project. But today they're going to be talking about that project, and it's about inclusive heritage engagement in Scottish island communities, and really very much in relationship to the use of archives. So without any further ado, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Audrey, and thank you for inviting us to speak today. I'm just going to share the presentation now. Is that okay? Has that gone to proper full screen? Fantastic. So yeah, thank you for that introduction. That's brilliant. The presentation is going to be myself, Sally, and Mark and Esther today. So as Audrey's introduction was brilliant, I'm going to hand over to Esther.
Hi, from a very wild and windy Shetland this morning. We had to have a chat with Sally this morning to say, if Mark and I vanish mid-presentation, it's because the power's gone down. So we, as Audrey said, we've been working this project as a partnership between MSDS Marine and Moderdye, both island-based heritage organisations with a maritime focus. So we've also been working with 9 other community partners from Skye and Shetland. So in Shetland, we were working with Archaeology Shetland, with the Shetland Community Trust, which is the main heritage body, with Shetland Arts Development Agency, with Archaeology Shetland Community Group, and with Ability Shetland, which is a group for folk with various long-term disabilities, and the Moving On project, bringing people back into employment, and the Borough History Group. And in Skye, Sally was working with the Museum of the Isles at Armadale Castle and the Skye and Loch Alsh Access Panel. So we were sort of replicating each other's workshops and sessions across this project. Can I have the next slide, Sally? So as Audrey has already said, this was an outreach to ownership project. So there were 5 of these running across the UK. And we were focusing on engagement with island communities. We have a higher density of archaeological sites on Scottish Islands compared with the mainland. We also in Shetland are very, very lucky with our archives. So we have a really high quality archive provision, and there's a lot of documents that we can access in person that other rural areas particularly might not have the opportunity to use. We looked at specific challenges facing island communities which may influence their engagement. Some of it to do with things like disabilities and infrastructure that you might have everywhere. Some of it quite island specific to do with aging communities and depopulation. And so we did various sessions exploring those across the 2 different island groups. And I'm going to hand back over to Sally to give us a bit of a quick overview.
That's brilliant. Yeah, so we kind of used that as our context, our setting really for developing this project, which really what we wanted to do was look at the island audiences and the kind of communities who might be engaging with archives or with heritage in different ways, and then look at the barriers facing them, so that the things that Esther mentioned, and then potential strategies for dealing with them, and then to run a series of events, because we're already kind of working with our local communities anyway in projects that are sort of focused around heritage, but the idea was to run a series of events under this project and then to evaluate them, to look at differences between the demographics and any challenges that were being faced by individuals or communities in kind of accessing those events. So we did things like coastal surveys, as well as online workshops, GIS workshops, and archive workshops, which are what we're gonna focus on today really. And then we evaluated the project data and looked at like specifically engagement in these island communities. So this is quite an intense slide, sorry. This is basically what we found. This is a summary of the kind of the key barriers affecting island communities. So key things which influence whether people engage with heritage events, including with archives. So it was things like distance to travel, which can be greater in rural or island settings. There's just kind of longer distances involved, disabled access, lack of time. So a lot of these are issues which face communities generally, but then that you get sort of ones which have more of a bearing on small communities like the gatekeepers. So the networks, the island networks of kind of people who are involved in this sort of thing are really, really important if you want people to engage and to hear about events and to sort of feel that the events are, for them really. You have to sort of go in via the right route. So that the right hand side of the slide shows you everything that we did under the project. So the archives is what we're going to focus on here. And we also, the project was primarily focused on Skye and Shetland, but because we were running a separate project in the Western Isles at the same time, which was actually using physical archives. So it was using material that had been excavated for archaeological sites on the Outer Hebrides, as a kind of focus for engagement really. So we were running antler crafting workshops. So there's this fantastic history of antler working on the Western Isles, which includes like comb making workshops that were there from the Norse period. And it was kind of because those archives have been moved away from the Western Isles, that the physical actual artifacts aren't there anymore. We were able to take back replicas and teach communities how to make their own replicas, so they've got kind of some kind of engagement. So that was more focused on physical remains. So I'm going to pass back over to Mark now, who's going to talk a bit more about what we did in Shetland.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so in Shetland we ran some coastal surveys where we took people around some coastal archaeological sites, and we had a look at those. And then we ran some archive workshops with Brian Smith, who's the archivist here in Shetland. We ran 3 workshops where people were introduced to what the archive can provide in terms of documents, the number of documents the archive holds, and how people can actually access those documents. And it was quite interesting from an accessibility point of view, that actually the Ability Shetland workshop, which we ran, where I think there were 13 participants, one of them was in a mobility wheelchair, and there was a tiny lip on the entrance to the museum, probably only about, I don't know, a quarter of an inch high, something like that, and her wheelchair wouldn't go over it. So we had to find a novel route for her to get into the museum via the cafe, going up a ramp round the back of the building. And that museum is supposed to be fully accessible. So just from that point of view, that was quite a good learning experience, really. During the archive sessions, Brian brought down various documents from the repository. Some were written in Old Norse, and some were valuation roll records, which we use quite a lot. When we're looking at archaeological sites around Shetland, it's good to start to find out who actually owned which buildings, which are now ruins. As well as archive sessions, we ran pop-up workshops. We found that actually the pop-up workshops, which were held in commercial areas of Shetland, were better received than those that were held in so-called heritage sites. And we also commissioned an artist to produce an artwork, which you can see down on the right-hand bottom part of the slide. There's a video on our website, which we can share a link with you shortly, which will tell you, Christina will tell you about her experience of working with us on this project. Okay, I think that's pretty much it, really. Next slide, please, and back to Sally.
Brilliant. Yeah, so we did a very similar set of things in Skye as well. So we ran archive workshops in Skye too, and kind of yeah, went through a similar thing, like teaching people to use the archives in their local area. And it just, some of the things, it's difficult to talk through all of it really, but some of the things that we picked up on were some of the issues with people wanting to, so the archive we were working with was the Museum of the Isles Armadale Castle, which is a kind of clan-based archive. So then we got some feedback from members of the community who didn't want to go to the archive because of the past history of the clan within the community, and the clearances and things like that. So that was sort of still felt within the community. And then the Museum of the Isles, the archives themselves, sort of noted that they've got a problem bringing in younger audiences, so that was something that they were keen to explore. And then when we actually collected the data, which I can actually move on to the next slide for, when we collected the demographic data for who was attending, there were some interesting patterns in terms of there were more men than we were expecting, and there was kind of a wider range really. So yeah, I'll pass back to Mark at this point.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, so it was interesting, the demographic. Sally noted that actually there seems to be a preponderance of men using the archives rather than women, and that's probably true in Shetland. We also found that within archive workshops, the general sort of demographic tends to be sort of older people using the archives. And we're actually starting to think about how we can actually engage with younger people and get them to be involved and show an interest in their local history. We can do that through local history groups, but again, the local history groups tend to be of an older generation. So we're looking at another phase of this project about how we're going to actually engage with younger people. Trying to think what else we can say, really. I think that's pretty much it.
Picking up from your younger people, there was something, it sort of only occurred to me as we were speaking then about the physical archive, the excavated material. I should have said earlier, the work in the Western Isles, we were doing it alongside Cardiff University, who've done a lot of the excavations out there. And those workshops where people were sort of crafting their own things and making stuff really using their hands, they really attracted young audiences. So we had like there was a lot of younger people who got involved in those sorts of things. So that's something that the projects are ongoing, aren't they? So we're hoping to look at how to work with young audiences more in the future. Yeah, and picking up from that, Sally is also using sites which aren't normally associated with heritage. So yeah, town centres, shopping centres, that kind of thing, really. We're looking forward to the next stage. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, just thank you everybody. Thank you for listening and for inviting us to present.
That is great. Thank you very much. I am not expecting any of you. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to know if Esther was coming back on, but she's not. That is great. Thank you very much. It is an incredibly interesting project and fantastic that you've actually been able to work together thinking about where Skye and Shetland, although we think of it, they're being quite close, actually, it's quite difficult engaging, and lots more things to come. And maybe I'm going to start this off. Actually, I will keep an eye on the chat room, but I'd quite like to start off in thinking, you've done this research and you've engaged with large amounts of people. Actually, I'm amazed how many people you've engaged with. You can actually just tell us how many people you engaged with in the first project. But what are your plans for the next project? You said you maybe a younger audience. Is that something that you think needs addressing?
Yeah, I think so. And we're probably going to focus around, I think the project's going to be called Fishing Tales. So it's going to be around, obviously Shetland still does a big fishing industry, and that is cross-generational. So we're going to look at a project around that. In terms of archaeological sites, there's quite a few fishing stations which haven't really been documented or recorded around Shetland. And so we can use some of the tangible remains of those sites as a starting point on which to hang some interesting fishing tale stories.
Does that suggest that it's maybe oral history as well in there, or? Yeah,
definitely oral history, and also certainly from my own research, I use a lot of photographic evidence as well, because my interest is in vernacular boats, and so you can actually get a lot of information from looking at old photographs, which in Shetland begin around about 1880. So,
yeah. And a lot of these fishing stations are from the sort of herring boom and the various, so they're sort of quite modern from an archaeological perspective, so they haven't been particularly recorded, but it in fact fits beautifully with oral history and archive material. Because of course you have that, which we regularly in archaeology we don't have. So it's nice to get a multidisciplinary project going that might have more relevance to what's still a very, very active and vibrant fishing community.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a good way to tie it backwards too, because there's a really long history of herring fishing on the Western Isles, definitely. So that there's this huge increase in herring exploitation just around the Norse colonisation period. So it's like well over 1,000 years of the herring fishery there, just kind of on the island. So that continuity is a really good way to engage with people.
And you can tie it right back, as Sally's saying, from the modern fishing right back to the sort of herring boom in the kind of 19th and early 20th century, then right back, as Sally's saying, right back into incorporating Norse sites and bringing in the history, almost working backwards from the modern day back to sort of the Norse period.
Yeah. I have seen in the chat, Hanneke has got a question. Would you like to unmute and ask your question rather than me ask it?
Sure. Thank you. I was just nosy. I saw antler workshops a couple of times and I thought, oh, what is that?
So that was one of the things that we did on the Western Isles. So it was teaching. So this it was based on the archaeological findings, so the artifacts from the islands that have been excavated over like long periods of time, and basically in the process of doing the post-excavation work, the guy's called Ian Dennis. He's fantastic. He's an illustrator by trade, really, but then also into experimental archaeology. And in the process of kind of illustrating the tools, he started making them and started making replicas, and then has worked out stuff about them, and then has done experimental archaeology on them. So he's got these sort of beautiful replicas through that process, and then he started teaching people how to make them. So the antler workshops were focused on making your own artifact. Really, they're based on the ones in the sites. So sites like Bornish, where there's the Comb Making Centre, which is a Norse site, or Inish to Norse site. We focused it around those, which was it's fantastic.
Oh, thanks. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. We've got another question from Jasmine. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question, that'd be great.
Hello, I'm seeing you on this side, but I'm in this camera for some reason, so I'll talk to this one and not look at you, unfortunately. Thank you, everyone, for your presentations today. They were really interesting. I myself am based in the Western Isles, so I'm very interested to find out about this forthcoming project between yourselves at MSDS Marine and Modern. So I was just wondering how we might find out more information about that, please.
Jasmine, I've actually keep thinking about getting in touch with you. Are you for the Japanese Heritage Forum? Yeah, I keep thinking with all the work you do, we should get in touch. So I can send you my email if you like, and we can keep you updated on it. But at the moment, all of the projects under the Outreach to Ownership scheme are kind of being taken forward. So we're doing project proposals now in more detail, and then the projects will be running, I think, for the next sort of 9 months or so. So that's the kind of timescales, and we'll be social media updates and things like that as we go through. But yeah, it's first stages at the moment.
Okay, one in time.
Audrey, you need to unmute.
Sorry, the £5 I have to pay as a penalty. Peter, you have got a question. Are you very happy to comment and say it out loud rather than me interpret it?
Yes, certainly. I just, from our point of view here in the Western Isles, one of the smaller historical societies, certainly found today very, very useful. Lots of possibilities open for us. We've just nearing the end of vast digitisation project. We're about to publicly launch our website, and we're looking for lots of ideas for community engagement. So I'm hoping to catch up with Jasmine at some point in the near future. But yeah, lots of positives as usual from one of these sessions. So thank you very much.
Great. No, thank you, Peter, for commenting. Something I was just about to put into the chat room, because I'm very interested to hear, is the idea of going out. Both the speakers talked about going out and showing outside of an archive or a museum or a gallery, going to a shopping centre, or Alan, you were talking about, putting up these drums and the response you got. Do you think we need to do more of that? Do you think we're being a bit slow when we want to sort of like show the importance of sort of all the community archives we have? Is there an appetite for that? I don't know if any of the speakers want to carry on with that just before we have to finish. I'm thinking of that.
Shall I speak?
Yes, please.
Interesting enough, I've always thought that. I remember when I was at college, my first few exhibitions were in all the shopping centres and even the Magnum Ice Rink. And I, even at that young age, obviously I was keen for my work to be seen by folk anywhere, but the response I've had from people on Instagram, as Sally said, folk that I don't know at all, was fantastic. I think it just makes a lot of sense in some ways to sort of pursue that if you can. And having access to these drums was, such a good way to do it.
I think it's a lot to do with etiquette and a feeling that if you've ever gone on holiday somewhere and there's a shop that you don't know how quite it works, it's a bit like going into the archive for the first time. You don't know the etiquette of that, but if you bring things out to people in a way that's just so much more accessible and easy to see, and maybe a little bit in your face, but it was also kind of quite subtle. It just brings people to you in a really different way, and it removes that nervousness of going into the French butchers and asking for the wrong sausage.
Very good. I like that one. Yes, the French sausage. Yes. Yes, you might come out with a chicken. Yeah. Yes.
Like 20 of them.
Yes. No, I think that is. I went to visit in Wakefield, actually, just near York, a very interesting community project, and they were using unused retail units within shopping centres, which there are quite a few about, and just the success of them, and how actually the other retailers were very happy because everyone who went to their community events actually bought things in the other shops. So it's a win-win situation. I just want to say that Jill, if you've not seen it, has put into the chat, I love going out to the community. It opens up a two-way channel of communication and enables people to feel they can come in, which is very true. It's rather than just being someone who is observing, they actually feel that they're taking part, don't they? So that's all very interesting. Is there any other questions? People can put their hand up virtually using the reaction button, or I will try and scroll through and see. I'm not seeing anything, and we are sort of now at 1:30. So I'm going to just say, if I can, I'm looking at Ingrid here. I just want to say thank you to everyone, including Ingrid, but to all the speakers, actually. Really interesting, very thought-provoking. I've learned a lot from today's lunchtime webinar. And I want to thank everyone else who has spent their lunchtime with us today. And I very much hope you will continue to join us. The best way probably is on Twitter, if you do use it, or on Instagram, because there's lots of community archives and heritage group events coming up, especially around, I think, oral history. And if anyone's interested, please do get in contact with me, and even I can pass you on to the right person, because Scottish Council and Archives do cover the whole of Scotland. So I'm loving hearing from all the people from all over the place today. That's wonderful. But again, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to stop recording, and it will be available. We might send you a feedback sheet out through your email addresses just to see what you thought of today's event and if we should do more of them.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you.
Well,
all right.
well cheered.
Bye, everyone.